Hi, I'm Rachel Abbasi. Welcome to the Recovery Daily Podcast. As always, thanks for spending time with me. Hello, thank you for joining me today. What I wanted to talk about today is this idea of conceding to our innermost self, that something needs to change or nothing's going to change. So this is if you're someone who is trying to get sober or you're already sober, this is step one in the sobriety program. But what I like to do is try to align my sobriety program with what I faced in post-stroke in recovery and stroke recovery, with vestibular recovery, and learning how to accept that I have a disability, a permanent disability. And all of it for me really came back to the exact same process, which started with conceding to my innermost self. So in sobriety, it was a little difficult to concede to my innermost self because I couldn't access my innermost self. It was just completely covered up and hidden, and I was blind to really my true emotions because I was always drinking over everything. Um, Today, I am friends with my innermost self, but it took a lot of practice to get there. In stroke recovery, it took me 2 years to finally accept that what happened to me, my stroke, is something that changed my life forever. And in comparison, and I apologize for bouncing back and forth, but it's a mirror journey for me. Sobriety too was like this acceptance, which is long, like a long process, that my life is going to change forever. So that conceding to my innermost self is the beginning of real change. Um, it happens in an instant, and it begins when we recognize the simple truth that the way I'm trying to live my life right now is not working, and something needs to change. Whether that means for me, I was drinking 24/7, so I needed to give up alcohol. In stroke recovery, it was like I'm trying to work a full-time job with this inability to function the way that I used to. I was trying to work 10-hour days when I had this disability that was inhibiting me from not only being able to ingest or process visual movement without pain, but to also cognitively keep up with my how I was working before. Um, so, like I said, in early sobriety, my innermost self was buried. I couldn't access it. It was buried under denial. I was in survival mode and I was just full of fear. So I really didn't have any clarity as to like, what do I need to tackle first? I finally got to this point of willingness to admit something had to change. And that sounds all fancy and glossy to look at, but it didn't feel fancy and glossy to reach realization on my own. The way that I realized it was in sobriety was it was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. I was drunk. I was hopeless and I was desperate. And I looked in the mirror and I couldn't believe what I saw. And I whispered to myself, "You're already dead." I realized that I was dying. And I never want to go back there ever again in my whole entire life. And that was the beginning of the willingness. That was my admission that something had to change. And thank God that I got to that point. If I could bottle that and sell it, I would, and save lives with it. But what happened in my stroke recovery that left me, so my stroke left me with a vestibular disorder, a disability, a permanent disability. And there is no cure for what I have. And I reached this point where I was talking to HR on the phone or like on Zoom, and she was like so kind and asking me how I was doing. And I said that I was in a lot of pain, and she was like, "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep functioning this way," because it was getting worse. The pain was getting worse. The decline in my health was definitely getting more rapid. And after talking to her, I had had her and other people tell me many times over those 2 years that I went back to work after my stroke, like, you can't keep doing this to yourself. Something has to change. And I just couldn't see what could change because all I knew is, well, I have to have a job. I have to figure out how to function like this. But what I was blind to was that there was another way to live, I don't have to live that way. I don't have to learn how to live that way with this pain. I realized somehow, I guess I didn't realize until after I was like in motion I just knew something had to change. And what I learned over time is that I needed to learn how to live a different way, that I could no longer function at that level with my limitations. And just as in sobriety, I could no longer function with the limitations that alcohol was leaving me with. So something had to change. So that was my first real concession, was I could no longer live the way that I had been living. And just admitting that opened up the door to possibility that maybe there's another way. If I can't live that way anymore, maybe there's another way. And if there is a solution, I certainly couldn't see it. But I knew at this point that what I needed to do was almost like falling back into the arms of, like that game that you play when you're a kid, or that trust game where you just close your eyes and fall back into somebody else's arms. That's what I had to do. And I was falling back into the arms of, oh my gosh, what I call now Team Rachel. And it consisted of, in stroke recovery, it consisted of a stroke support group, which just so happened to meet today. So I got to meet with my stroke family online, and doctors, tons and tons of doctors. And that medical team, Rachel, it continues to evolve. So I recently moved, and I'm still trying to get I have a loop monitor implanted that monitors if I have AFib. And there's a report on that that gets sent to my old cardiologist. And I need that report to go to my new cardiologist, but I can't seem to make that happen. And these things can be so incredibly frustrating that opening the door to possibility when I realize that something has to change, it is hard, whether it is sobriety, whether it is stroke recovery, vestibular therapy, whatever it is that you are facing that has gotten you to the point where you have to concede to your innermost self, then this is serious stuff. And this is where we have to start inviting that inner voice to talk to us. The inner voice that I couldn't hear when I was drinking. I thought it was an inner voice, but it was my disease that was talking to me when I was drinking. So when I stopped drinking and I started practicing the meditation and some of the meetings that I went to, um, when I would get quiet, it got so freaking loud in my head. It's like my inner voice was screaming, trying to get out. And I couldn't calm it down. It took years of practice to be able to listen to the voice of my innermost self. But one of the things that helped me do that was listening to people in my program who were able to speak with their voice of their innermost self. So listening to them helped me to recognize that voice inside me. And practicing the steps of my program helped me to understand what that voice is saying to me. And over time, I realized that I had heard that voice before, but there were so many things that were speaking louder than it because I had so many issues that I wasn't facing. I was drinking over them instead. So, anything that that voice was trying to tell me, I'm like, don't talk to me. I don't want to deal with it. And today, like after going through the steps, I feel more honest with myself. I feel like now I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to say like every time I face a problem, I have this inner voice that says, "Now, Rachel, this is how you're going to deal with it today." Like I still have the noise of my disease that breaks through, and because I just like my disability, I have a permanent disease. And as long as I don't drink, then it keeps it at bay. It keeps that voice at bay. So, sobriety helped me to reconnect with that voice, and the steps helped me learn how to listen. So my disease wanted to negotiate with me all the time. Like, this would feel good. Your problems would all go away if you just had this bottle of wine. Well, what negotiates with me today is depression and anxiety. And I think that, that's the thing that clouds, that gets in the way of my inner voice, my honesty, like my ability to like really sit down and think like, what do you need right now, Rachel? Because that innermost self is what holds the truth about what I need. And my other invisible illnesses, because I have lots of them, I'm gifted with lots of individual indivisible. Oh my gosh, invisible. Sorry, stroke. I had a stroke. Invisible illnesses. They want me to live a certain way. They want me to feed them. And I'm not going to, but I really have to um, do a lot of pausing. I have to do a lot of like turning over my will, you know? I didn't understand what it felt like to let go. And I learned that in sobriety and have been able to apply that to my stroke recovery and my vestibular disorder. So, admitting that I don't have control of people, places, and things was part of my program in sobriety, and or is part of my program in sobriety. And it's really come into being one of the most important concepts that I have to practice on a day-to-day basis because I can't control my disability. I can't control the pain in my head. There's no medication that can control the pain in my head. The only thing that I have control of is within my fingertips, right? So anything from my fingertips in, I have control of. And that means that if I'm doing something that is causing me pain, I get to choose to stop. Um, just like with drinking, drinking causes indescribable pain, um, mental, spiritual, physical. It causes all kinds of pain, relationship. I get to choose to not drink. It didn't feel like it was a choice in the beginning. When I first stopped drinking, I truly felt like I had to drink to live. And so trying to figure out then how to live without that is like somebody telling you like, okay, hold your breath, now go for a walk. You know? And then when you come back, you can breathe again. That's what it felt like. It felt like somebody was telling me, now you have to do all the things in life, but I'm not going to give you any tools to live. I'm not going to give you any tools to help you out. And so the only way that I could live was to, they say, the only thing you have to change is everything. That's exactly what I had to do. Um, I had to exchange my old life for a new one. And this is the same thing that happened when I was 2 years into working after my stroke, and I made the decision I can't keep living this way. And I shut my computer, and that was it. I think I texted my boss and I said, I can't work anymore. Like, that's it. I have to call it quits. And I'm sure he called me after that, but I couldn't, or I called and left him a message. I don't know. He was not available at the moment, but I had to tell him that I was no longer going to be available. And it was the same thing at that point. I had to trade my old life for a new one. And you know what? In sobriety, so when I had my stroke, I was 5 years sober, and I loved my life. I loved my life. I loved my job. I loved all the people in my life because my sobriety program had helped me work out my relationships. So every day I was doing this daily inventory. I was living the program in my life. So I loved my life. So I'm reaching this second time in my life that I had to exchange my old life for a new one. Well, in sobriety, when I got into sobriety, it was like I could see that it wasn't working, and I didn't even like my old life. It was terrible. It was terrible. Um, I couldn't even show up to work, all of these things. I'm not going to go down that road. But I was ready to trade my old life for a new one. Even though I was scared, like, I'm like, well, what about these friends my best friends in the world that I drink with? Can't be their friend anymore. But what I had to do was close my eyes and fall back into the arms of the people who loved me and the people who wanted the best for me and knew the only way for me was to build a new life. And they got it. I was lucky enough to be someone who had those people around me. And so I got to step out of that wilderness into a new light. And that light just grew brighter and brighter and brighter. So when I had to leave my job, um, I just spoke about on Monday, I talked about how do you know when it's time to stop going to doctor's appointments and just start living? Well, it might be interesting to also have an episode about how did I know it was time to leave my job? So I will take hopefully a mental note of that. I have a hard time to take mental notes in the middle of anything. So I'm going to literally take a note while we are podcasting so I don't forget to do an episode about that. And it's how did I know it was time to leave my job? Because of my vestibular disability. So I'll make sure that I talk about that. Um, it's so making that decision again in my life, but making it when I don't want to give up my old life. I mean, I can't tell you how much I cried, and I told my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time. I said, I feel like everything that I've ever worked for, I'm just throwing it in the trash. And he said, you're looking at it all wrong. Everything that you worked for is around you right now. And that will stay with me for the rest of my life because that was a pivotal point for me. It made me realize that my job was not my purpose. My career was not my purpose. Um, I had been living that way as if my job was my life. And in so many ways, our job becomes our life because those are the people that we're friends with. That's where we spend all of our time. So what he introduced to me in just saying that sentence was there's a life around you that you haven't noticed. And since then, I have built a life around that other stuff that prior to leaving my job, I wasn't even noticing. Sure, I loved my boyfriend. We're married now. And sure, I love my children and my house and my pets and I used to go out for runs and I was exercising and I was enjoying life outside of work, but probably 80% of my thoughts were repetitive and were about work. And I had to figure out what am I going to think about now? Um, and what I have grown to replace those thoughts about my job are recovery. So recovery starts with willingness. And I needed to become willing to make that change. I needed to reach a turning point, and everybody's turning point is different. For me, it was really helpful that I had debilitating pain because I simply could not use my eyes anymore. Um, I could only close my eyes or look at the ground. That was it. Anything else caused just absolutely debilitating, sharp lightning pains in my head. So my willingness was forced in my stroke recovery. But that wasn't the only time that I needed to decide to be willing. Um, willingness is, it feels like it's as strong as someone's desire to, it feels like willingness should be as strong as someone's desire to live. But that's not what it felt like for me. So in sobriety, because at the time that I have to make that decision and reach that turning point, I am desperate. I'm desperate. In sobriety, I was desperate. In stroke recovery, I was desperate. So that willingness doesn't feel like this amazing, overtaking, like light that shines bright and is like, this is your North Star. This is the way. That's not what it felt like to me. What it felt like to me was, I can't keep living this way, so I've got to find another way. And then with that willingness, I learned how to say yes. um, Asking for help, accepting help. I have a whole episode on oh, that's accepting compliments. I'm sure I have an episode on accepting help as well. Um, One thing I heard the other day was we either do the work or we don't. There's no try. And I think that the person said it was from Star Wars, from I can't think of the name, from Star Wars, Yoda. I think that's what they said. Anyway, um, that's where I got to. I got to either I'm going to change or I'm not going to change. That's it. There is no standing still. Either I need to change my trajectory or I'm going to continue to deteriorate. And I was indeed killing myself. My body was slowly deteriorating and was very damaged from my drinking. In stroke recovery, I am pretty darn sure that I broke myself by going back to work for 2 years and reaching that point of debilitating, sharp pains in my head, because they never went away until I started taking Emgality. I didn't have those sharp pains for the 2 years. I had like this feeling of like 100 rubber bands wrapped around my head. That's what it felt like. And that's the feeling that I have on a daily basis. But by straining myself to the point that I did, I had these terrible, terrible sharp pains in my head. Um, so I've always said, like, I feel like I broke myself. Um, but it's very reminiscent of when I was reaching my bottom drinking as well. So I needed in both cases to admit complete defeat. And it made me feel like I was a failure. Admitting complete defeat does not mean you're a failure. It means you're willing to say, I'm not okay, and it's time to change. Or admitting complete defeat is like saying, I'm not okay, and I want to live. I had somebody ask on Facebook, if you don't drink, why did you stop? No. The question was, if if you don't drink, why if you sorry, why don't you drink or something like that? For those of you who don't drink, why? Something like that. And I said, because I want to live. That was it. And that's the heart of my step one. And that's the heart of my step one for stroke recovery as well. Um, why did I make the decision to leave my job? Because I wanted to live. And I couldn't continue to live the way that I was. Something had to change. And as soon as I made that decision, it was actually while I was just blubbering, like just blubbering, ugly cry, blubbering, I realized that there is another way. I already had a passion inside of me that had been waiting for this, and it was focusing on recovery. And that same day, I asked my brother if he would start a Spotify account for me. So the same day that I left my job, I started this podcast, um, which is, I was talking to my psychiatrist about it. I'm like, I don't know. It's like I can't rest, you know? But I have found an amazing way to live despite being in a lot of pain a lot of the time. But the only way that I could do it was getting to that point of admitting complete defeat. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to say, I'm not okay. It's hard to say I'm not okay because we're so used to having somebody say, "Oh, how you doing? Good morning. How you doing?" And you're like, "I'm okay." I can't tell you how many times I've said I'm okay and I was not okay. And today I have to look inward and ask myself, are you okay today? Because if you're not okay, you don't have to live out the rest of the day not okay. There are options today um, to work towards being okay. And I want to be okay as much as I possibly can because that's what living better feels like. That's what joy feels like. I don't have to, I feel very subdued today. I don't know why. But I feel like I don't have to spend so much energy being not okay. It's so much easier to be okay. So I'm hoping that this podcast and me sharing my experience, strength, and hope with what I deal with on a daily basis helps you feel okay. Feel okay more often. And if it doesn't, like, let it open the door to professional help. There are so many options out there for recovery support, whether you're in sobriety, vestibular, recovery, stroke recovery, OCD, like we talked about with my friend Caitlin, who was on the show. And I'm going to be I've got a lineup of more guests coming as they are able to with their busy schedules. But there's lots of other recoveries that I want to talk about with folks on the show so that it will resonate that there's a lot of us that just aren't okay. And I luckily have lots of friends in different recovery programs that have found a way to be okay. And I want that to be helpful to all of you. So that is all I have for today. Thanks for joining me. And I hope you are enjoying the beautiful weather. If it is nice where you are, it's like 85 degrees here today. And I forgot my English bulldog cannot be out in that kind of weather for very long. He starts panting. So we're back to, it was only like 3 weeks ago that it was 30 degrees outside and they couldn't be out there because it was too cold, and now it's too hot. So I don't know, where did the spring go? Hopefully it's going to come back. I think it's about to be in the 30s again next week. So it's all over the place. So just try to stay healthy, and I will talk to you next time.